So hello everyone, Mr. Jonathan Fink in our today's episode, the author and host of the Silicon Curtain podcast on YouTube. Be sure to check his channel out. Hello.
Hello. Absolutely delighted to meet you and
As
speak with you.
usual, I'm really glad
Maybe
to
cut that bit out.
yeah, I'm really
Delighted to
glad to
meet the
see our
audience. Yeah.
friends from other YouTube channels on our channel, and to start the discussion, the talk. You have plenty of experts and content creators and influencers and journalists on your podcast, Silicon Curtain. What's their overall mood? What's their prognosis on the current shuttle diplomacy implemented by the United States? I mean, the ceasefire that didn't take action, the negotiations, and will there be something on May the 9th, the Russian Victory Day, probably?
I think my channel, and this is a very conscious decision, is fairly unique in its approach in that I try to get at least 30% of the guests on the channel, especially talking about these kind of issues. I try to make sure they're Ukrainian experts and Ukrainian voices. That is extraordinarily important because Ukrainians and actually people who are geographically closer to Russia have a different perspective on what Russia's motivations and intentions are than many Western commentators. And unfortunately, I watch a lot of material, but I'm very selective on who comes on the channel. And I want people who really understand the long-term behavior of Russia, not just over the last couple of days, the last couple of weeks, during the Trump regime, but going back to, the last 2 decades, to the Minsk Accords and breaking all of those. And in the long term, you see a consistent pattern of behavior that you need to ignore all the words. You need to ignore all the fluff and the smoke and the noise that goes on about this shuttle diplomacy. Because until something actually happens, then it's all entirely meaningless. And I think Trump operates on that same level. Here's a bunch of noise, here's a bunch of things to create news headlines. And much of the media obliges. And they go and they repeat what he says. Oh, he said this about Zelensky. He said this about Putin. He's very upset with Putin. Is he? Is he really? Is he upset enough to actually do something about it, to impose secondary sanctions? Is he upset enough to try and crash the Russian economy? Is he upset enough to give Ukraine what it needs to win? No, he's not. He's not doing any of these things. So the words really don't matter. And I think certainly many of the Ukrainian guests, and certainly many of those who are, I would say, more from the Baltics, Poland, and Finland and so on, they understand that this is just all part of, it's another form of warfare. Negotiation is warfare until you stop fighting, at least where Russia's concerned.
I can see, I understand what you're meaning, that actions are always more important and more demonstrative in intentions than words. And yes, I will agree with you on that. Right now, what we are seeing is some kind of turmoil. So the big chaos started in Europe. Denmark is suffering some kind of Ukraine flashbacks with all these claims that Greenland will be the 51st state, we need Greenland, and all that. It all reminds me, the story of Crimea, Ukrainian Crimea being occupied by Russia. God forbid that happens with Greenland inside NATO alliance, and it's more maybe a destructive maneuver. But really, I see they having Ukraine flashbacks right now, and they don't like it.
No, and the rhetoric is similar. I mean, many in the West will not understand the parallels you're talking about. But again, it's important to get the Ukrainian perspective because the things that are being said by many within the Trump administration, some of those phrases about Denmark being a bad custodian of Greenland, they've done a bad job, etc., etc. This is exactly the kind of rhetoric that we heard in the run-up to the Little Green Men that appeared in Crimea, and then, of course, the Russian-backed so-called insurgent forces. We now know that there may well have been some local insurgents, but of course there were many sort of GRU agents, there are many Russian military operatives, and indeed the whole thing had much more alignment with Moscow than has ever sort of been admitted or even acknowledged by many of the experts. The challenge, of course, here is this more bluff? Is this more bluster? Or is there something deeper behind it? And I fear there is. I fear that, and many of the guests I've had on recently, including Edward Hunter Christie, Cormac Smith, and many others, seem to concur in this. And that is that Trump is looking at the actions of Putin, Xi, and others, and he wants to emulate them. He has become the apprentice to dictators, and to him, that kind of imperial, extractive, acquisitive mentality and way of doing business feels closer to him, feels close to his personality, feels close to his understanding of how business works. And unfortunately, it's not good news for small countries. I say small countries as in Britain, Ukraine, in their view, are not peers. We are all seen as countries that do not have genuine sovereignty. So whereas if you listen to Dugin and others, this is how Ukraine has been talked about for years, they're starting to not just talk about, but actually look at and consider all countries that are not hegemonic sort of superpowers in their point of view as not having, I would say, full-blown or even valid sovereignty. And if you don't think an entity has sovereignty, but it has something that you want, or is in the way of having a better relationship with Russia, or some grandiose geopolitical plan, well, if you don't count them as an equal, if you don't really place much value on their partnership, then the thought is quite terrifying of what you might be prepared to do to those countries.
So let us remind our viewers that Alexander Dugin is a philosopher, is a really neo-imperialist Russian visionist, revisionist. He also has a long beard like Rasputin. He wears a robe.
Solzhenitsyn as well.
Yeah, he really looks like Rasputin in some terms. And he's an ideologist of Russian world ideology, the ideology that there are some imperial powers and all other countries in the world do not matter, that need to be conquered and subsidized, submitted to stronger powers. With what you're saying, I believe that in the eyes of these group of people that you mentioned before, only countries with nuclear capabilities are seen as sovereign nations, or at least countries, entities that have some degree of sovereignty. Like Denmark doesn't have nuclear weapons. UK has, France has, and, well, I mean, that's all in Europe.
It is, and of course, they'll probably be looking at the UK nuclear deterrence and thinking, well, we ultimately have veto over that. So I don't think that gives Britain the concept of sovereignty as a peer territory in that point of view. I'm not sure Trump actually realized that France had an independent nuclear deterrent, because I also suspect that his knowledge of certainly historical context, but also geopolitical context, is very bad. And even when he's told things, I'm not sure, too many of them actually sort of penetrate his skull. Not because I'm calling him stupid, because he has other things that he is obsessed with. He has these deals, these mineral deals, this, that, and the other, his property deals. This is what he's focused on. So I think some of the details of geopolitics don't quite sink in. I think there was a scene recently where it was explained to him that France has an independently built sort of nuclear deterrent using the platform of their own technology, and that the US doesn't have a veto over it. I think that probably came as quite a shock to him. I wonder whether that is still at the forefront of his mind or not. And of course, there are conversations about the nuclear umbrella being extended to Germany and potentially to other parts of Europe. We have these extraordinary conversations happening about America wanting to take over Ukraine's infrastructure. So
and nuclear power plants, to be for 1 second.
And nuclear power plants, exactly. Not because they're interested in power generation, it's because they would want to deny Ukraine the ability to develop an independent nuclear deterrent in future. They do not want Ukraine to become a peer power, to develop its own sovereign democracy, to use sort of Dugin's terminology. In this way, Washington and Moscow, unfortunately, are aligned and actually have been aligned since the Budapest Memorandum. They did not want Ukraine to be an independent entity, a powerful, separate, independent culture and economy with a nuclear deterrent. This isn't just Trump. This isn't new.
Okay, so let us remember the 2008 NATO forum in Bucharest, where the US president wanted Ukraine to join NATO, but some other leaders of countries say, no, we cannot do that because Mr. Putin would be angry at that, and we got the invasion of Georgia soon afterwards. And later we all know what happened 2014 Ukraine and 2022. But these times are turmoil and the times are changing, and let us really hope that something good will come out of all these chaos. So we know that usually out of time of stability usually comes a chaos, and in the heart of chaos something stable and ordered, yes, peace and order comes out of chaos. And let us hope that it will be positive for us, for democracies, for sovereign democracies, and not for such philosophers as Alexander Dugin.
Let's definitely hope so. And one, let's say, sort of silver lining may well be that Europe steps up to defend itself, to develop an indigenous, strong indigenous military-industrial complex, plus the will and cohesion to use it to genuinely sort of push back threats from these so-called, hegemonic imperial blocs. And I think that will only work if Ukraine is absolutely at the heart of that. That, if it comes to pass, could be an extremely positive thing that emerges out of all of this absolute horror and suffering and tragedy and loss.
Well, returning to internet jokes, there's been an already now old joke, it has a couple of years behind it, that Putin made NATO a real military alliance again. And now there's a joke that Donald Trump made EU the real federation for the first time in like 70 years of its existence. So right now the bloc is really looking forward into its own independence in the geopolitics, not just being part of the US-led world order, but settling something other. And that has evoked the reminiscence of BRICS. Yes, so these economic political alliances are trying to provide an alternative. While United States have its dollar, BRICS doesn't have its currency. Europe has euro, and there's a lot of trade being done in euro, and it has really more chances than BRICS to skyrocket in economy terms, in economy influence over the world.
I think so. I mean, BRICS, as far as I can tell, I'm not an economic expert, but I have obviously interviewed some who absolutely are. Timothy Ash, for instance, is one of the foremost economists in the UK, geopolitical economist, and also as an expert on Turkey, which is a kind of interesting things happening there as well. But there does not seem to be a fundamental economic, political, or even military defining logic to the countries in BRICS. They are in opposition to the previous order, the established order. So I think in this conversation we've sort of concluded that order is bound to change, is going to change, and the form of the new order that emerges has not yet come to pass. But I do not see that order coming from BRICS or from that structure in any shape or form.
Well, that is really much food for the thought. I believe that will be all our discussion for today. Thank you, Mr. Fink, for being with us in UATV studio. It was a fun conversation, an honest one. Really, sometimes you've got more like analytics and you go deep and deep, but today we had some kind of conversation with jokes, and I really enjoyed it. I hope that our viewers too.
Thank you. Yes, it's a great pleasure to be on and hopefully challenge a few sort of ideas and preconceptions people may have.
Yes, be sure to check this interview, maybe share it on your channel and comment in those comment section if there would be some provocative questions from our commentators, beloved commentators and trolls possibly towards the position of yours that we have demonstrated in this episode.